Steve Antoine, welcome to RLPSA Virtual Think Tank. You have entered the tank. It's not the Shark Tank, but the Virtual Think Tank. Are you stoked?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate Envision Risk Limiter sponsoring you to be here in this think tank. And man, so we've had some leadership conversations before, but this is the think tank. So we got to step it up a notch, right? Okay, so
I hope I don't disappoint, right? No pressure, no pressure.
That's what's fun about virtual, right? People
Right,
just
right.
listen.
They
They'll
can boo me
mute us.
later, right?
All right, so Steve Antoine, Chief Security Officer, Strategic Leadership and Risk and Resilience Professional. I want to start with that because that is not a title you hear every day. And I am a big fan of the word resilience. It's like, yes. So tell us, what does that mean to you and Yum?
Sure. Well, I've had the luxury of having done a lot of different things, and I have a really unique experience. But what it means to Yum is, I view that what we contribute to our organization is we grow know-how. So whether that's loss prevention or safety and security or however you want to define it, we speed communication and improve it. But at the end of the day, our job is to make sure that we can get back to business as quickly as practical, right? So we deal with whatever comes up, we react, we predict, we prevent, and then we move forward. So the resilience professional is, my job is to help us do that faster, speed to response, right? And to lead the team that's responsible for that. I'm just lucky enough to have a lot of professionals that do that very, very well.
Well, that's fantastic. So you think about what you just said really has no application for these days that we're living in.
Not at all.
None.
Right.
Which leads me to my next question, talking about leadership principles. And you're right, your background, is very packed with all different types of experience. You're looking at
Sure.
local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, a very significant stint at the U.S. State Department. So tell us, given all of that in your background and now ending up at Yum in a very, C-suite strategic level, what are your leadership principles and how they guide you through the philosophy that you just talked about?
Sure. So I guess the first part is how we got there. And I've been blessed and lucky to have a lot of influencers in my life. Some of them are huge. Colin Powell, for example, my first assignment in the detail or in the State Department was on his protective detail. So I dealt with him every day for 2.5 years. And I got to see, I've had unfettered exposure to big names and big leaders in big positions at big times. My father was an SES. He was the Deputy Auditor General for the Navy. So in my family, I have a big leader with a big title that did big things for a very long time. But then I've had the lucky and blessed experience to have everyday people that you wouldn't necessarily know the name, but they are huge leaders. Ron Holloway, Wendy Bashnan, and there's a litany of others, but those are the ones that come to mind because of their unique ability to convey a message, some of its style, some of its messaging. And I'm also an avid student. So I continue to learn, generally speaking, but specifically around leadership, because I've seen some poor leadership that I was invested in trying to find some good. And there's two books in particular that I reference because they serve as a foundation in combination with all of this access and all these people and examples that we've seen. So one of these books my father gave me, it's called Monday Morning Leadership. I want to say it's by David Cutnell. And the book is like this big, but it's a really quick read, and there's 3 basic principles that I try to apply every day. One of the chapters I think is called Drivers and Passengers, and basically it talks about the way you go through life. You can drive or you can ride, right? And it's a choice. But at the end of the day, until you accept responsibility, even for the things you can't control, it's hard to put a plan in place. So you just have to go. You just have to accept it, take the wheel, and drive. That's the basic principle. So, not everybody agrees with that style. And I was a diplomat for 16 years. So there is an on and off, and there is some regulatory actions that have to take place to make that occur. But at the end of the day, it's up to me, right? I want to lead from the front. The other big idea is keep the main thing the main thing. I think that's actually a chapter. And at the bottom line of that, thin slicing it, different people require different styles and different things, and I don't get to determine the main thing they do. But as long as I take care of that main thing, right? We keep people engaged, because at the end of the day, people quit people, they don't quit experiences. So and I think the last thing is the do right rule. So generally speaking, if you do the right thing, it's hard to go wrong, right? You'll make mistakes, but you'll get the grace because it was the right thing to do with the right intent. And you have to guard your integrity, because that's the one thing you can't get back, right? Um, so you combine those lessons with the overarching message, which is another book called The Mission, the Men in Me. I think that's Peter Blaber, and it's lessons from a former Delta Force commander. But at the bottom line, it's the title, and that is, if you take care of the men and women, they take care of the mission, which will ultimately take care of the leader. Some leaders have it backwards, right? They take care of themselves and everybody else be damned. And I'm not sure that's an effective technique. And my experience has been, if you keep people engaged and you take care of what they need, they'll take care of what you need, right?
Yeah. So in practicality, like execution, and I'm sure you have lots of team members that would testimony to this, but how do you execute that in an organization as big as Yum? And what does it look like on a day-to-day basis? Because you sometimes find that leadership style that's completely hands off and people are like, what? And then you've got the micro. So where does it fall with what you're referring to?
Well, the first thing is a listening tour. So with folks that are part of my direct team, I have to engage with them. I sit and I talk, because you'll be surprised what people will tell you if you actually pay attention and listen to them. You ask them, and they'll bring up things that are important to them. So I take a lot of notes and I listen, and then I try to give them what they need, or what they want, right? And then I augment that with what I think they need to be effective with whatever we're trying to execute. On a broader scale, I would invite myself to a lot of meetings that I wasn't invited to. And part of that was because, if I show true interest in what it is you do and I deliver on the things that are important to you, that'll provide me grace, and you'll sometimes ask, right? And I remember distinctly going to a brand meeting, and I sat in the very front row, and the CEO of this brand walked down the aisle, and what I didn't know is he knows all of his employees. It's a remarkable feat. And I had no idea. So he gets to me and he's like, hey, friend, I don't believe we've met. How do you help us? So I introduced myself as, hey, do you know this guy? Well, I'm the new that guy. And then he went about his business review and his presentation. And at the end of the meeting, I went back up to this gentleman and I said, excuse me, I wanted to apologize to you because I lied to you. You're like, well, what do you mean? I'm not the new that guy. I'm actually a totally different guy. And the reason I'm here is because my intent is to augment your business and to have my team plug in differently, which is why I invited myself to your meeting. And he was like, huh. I said, in order to help us, I need to know how you think and what's important to you, because I know what we can do and I know what our skill sets are, but we often apply things that are important to us and not important to the business. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in the everyday practicality, like, remember, I'm in a restaurant company and we spent a lot of time in retail loss prevention. That's what we do. That's the core of what we do. But there has to be an evolution, because how does loss prevention deal with riots? How does loss prevention traditionally deal with workplace violence? And now that stuff is in the store, and that's the most valuable thing. And if we're flexible enough to pivot and handle that too, well, then you'll get the other stuff is easy. That's what you've always done. Right. So people need help in figuring out what they don't know, not what they do know.
Yeah, I think that's often tough especially if you're a professional later in your career, and then you're met with things that aren't exactly in your wheelhouse. And a lot of times it's a scary conversation to say, hey, boss, I've got no idea, but so it's your philosophy that you embrace those times to pivot and learn with your colleagues. Is that how you would characterize that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you're always learning, right? And I think where you provide value is, what are the things that are valuable to the business, and do that, right? I think our last conversation, I was talking about picking up a box, right? It's the same principle. What's important, and engage in that, because there is something that you've either dealt with that was unique, you've handled that was in your wheelhouse already. But there is a contribution that you have and you don't know until you engage in it. Oh, right. Because there's synapses that should be touching that aren't necessarily intuitive.
Yeah. And so that's really like with your box analogy, if you just stick to what's in your wheelhouse and you're not reading the organization to know, well, actually they've pivoted and this is what's important, then you're doing yourself and your company a disservice.
Exactly right.
So looking at, what we've been dealing with COVID and the social unrest recently, talking about how an organization tackles these types of challenges. And of course, everything you just said kind of plays into that. But is there a top 3 things that you would say, if you weren't doing this now as an LP restaurant professional, you got to get on the ball, because you may have not been on the ball with COVID. And I mean, who could have predicted you needed a bazillion face masks, right? But I'm sure that there's a level of prediction that you brought up initially. How do you go about that?
Well, again, I have a unique background in the sense that, it's cyclical. Things will happen and they will keep happening. And the one thing that I do know is, you have to build your plan in the time of peace so that when things happen, you are ready to execute. You have to develop your action plan before the crisis. Otherwise, you're too late and it's too hard to execute during. And that's hard to see, right? And what you see routinely in loss prevention professionals is a lot of times they've been engaged in a business, deep into the business at the operational level for years at a time. And all we need to do is broaden their aperture. So if they're dealing with point of sale, that means they're dealing with cash flow, and operations. If they're dealing with openings and closings, well, those are the first things that are going to come up if you have civil unrest. When do you open and when do you close, and how do you advise that earlier in the system, right? So there are things that we do intuitively that we're just not connecting to the business in anticipation of what they may need. And the example is, so civil unrest, what are businesses going to need? They're going to need to know, well, how do I keep my employees safe and what kind of things should I be thinking? Well, loss prevention managers are already going to tell you, empty out your cash registers, close early when you can, make sure they clear the space, keep your drawers open so they realize there's nothing to break into and that lessens the chance of the damage, kind of thing. But a lot of times either they're not asked, and if they're not asked, that's when you need to kind of insert yourself because you have this expertise that they may be missing and don't realize, right? We're looking at the same picture from different angles. And that's not an easy task. But your question was, how do we anticipate that? It's not, it's what are the things that are cyclical that a business generally needs to prepare itself for, right? Weather issues, those reoccur. Social unrest, they reoccur. They just don't reoccur at the same frequency. Pandemics and illness, they reoccur. They just don't reoccur at the same frequency and the same severity. But if you have a baseline where you are prepared for certain issues, then all you have to do is scale the severity in which you need to deal with them, right? So if every business has an opening and closing plan or a cash securing plan, well, when would you need to execute that and work backwards from there? Well, would you have to secure your cash if a hurricane comes, right? It's June, which means hurricane season is right around the corner. So, right, what I can tell you right now is it's going to get worse. So the things that we just went through, that was nothing. Because right now you're going to have COVID on top of flu, on top of openings, on top of protests, on top of election year, on top of civil unrest, on top of police brutality, on top of storm season, all at the same time. That's what's coming. So you have like 3 months to think about and inform your business like, hey, I think a train's coming. And it is.
Yeah.
So build those processes now so that when this stuff starts to show up, you can just send the email. Hey, don't forget about closing early. Hey, don't forget about, touching base with your police contacts to see if people register nonviolent protests. Juneteenth is this weekend, right? Today is Thursday, Wednesday. Ask that question, or whatever day, right? Ask that question before so that you can anticipate what's going to happen later, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you boil it down to, it's really about a structured, organized, repeatable process.
Exactly the case, right? The foundations, they're almost always the same and they're almost always repeatable. It's just hard to build that foundation because the nature of the industry is such that we're always stomping out fires and we're mostly in a reactive moment.
So looking at your team and how you structure a team. And of course, Yum is a very big organization. How do you make sure that the team that you have are in the right seat? You hear that all the time. They're on the bus, but they're in the wrong seat, and it's very overplayed. But when you think about that analogy, how do you go about making sure that is the correct place for your team members?
Well, again, I mean, there's a constant assessment, and people are generally aware of what they are good at. They generally miss or misperceive what they aren't good at. And that's okay, because everybody has opportunities, but you want to capitalize on the strengths and improve the opportunities. But you don't want to keep somebody in a developmental space for long periods of time, because speed and execution matter, right? And we're also fighting a challenge. Like you said, Yum's a huge corporation. So what huge corporations have the luxury of doing is hiring specialists, right? And what smaller and leaner companies do is they hire generalists. I believe in the generalist approach. And the reason for that is because, if the categories that I value the most, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, flexibility, leadership acumen, initiative, social skill, productivity, information, media, and tech literacy. I can teach you the loss prevention stuff. I can teach you the safety and security stuff. We can Google it, right? Literally, you can Google it. But I can't teach you how to interact with people. I can't teach you how to bring people along. I can't teach you how to lead. I can't teach you how to think critically, especially if you're an adult, right? But with those skills already, it's easy then to take a subject matter and mesh it into what we need, and then you can pivot and play. And you want to broaden people enough so that they can do multiple things, because you also want to build continuity. And most organizations aren't going to build you, a 40-person team to go do loss prevention or safety and security or risk and resilience. That's not how it would work.
Yeah, and as you've seen in the restaurant field, and especially in the RLPSA community, it's people that wear all different hats. The folks like yourself that have a team, and then you've got the folks that have 200 restaurants that don't, right? So talking to that person, that individual, what would you say, if you had to step back and look at it and say, okay, I'm going to strategically plan for a 200 restaurant organization, like what things that should be on their top hit list if they're just coming in like clean slate, almost like a back to basics if the person's been there for 30 years, kind of recouping, because times change. We see that. So what would you say to that professional?
The first thing I would do is plug into each one of the business units. So how does development think about development with 200 restaurants? What's important to them? How does operations work through their operational decision making for these 200 restaurants, right? How does finance talk about how they finance and what's important? Because what security professionals normally do is they sell the security apparatus, which is seen as a cost center and a nuisance sometimes. But look what's happening during COVID, right? How do you do safety and security and food audits in a restaurant when you can't go to the store? How do you do that right now? So what operations are doing all across America right now is they're trying to figure out how to do that digitally using technology. So think about an officer camera and think about an employee wearing a camera and then doing the audit remotely, right? Well, why wouldn't we attach the security apparatus to that? Because operations is already saying it's important. So sell the operations part and then utilize it for the security, because the security part isn't the big idea, but the operations is the one that makes the money. So sometimes when you partner and you hear what people think about and how they think, we have the opportunity to leverage what we need to do and put them together.
And doesn't that tie into keeping the main thing, and the fact that if you're not selling the food that you're making, that is the main thing?
That's the main thing. Listen, Yum is a restaurant company. It's the world's largest multi-brand restaurant company. That's the main thing. We wish they were the world's largest, best security company, but that's just not the reality. So what we want to try to do is augment the world's largest and best food company with the best, right? But we have to know what they do and add what we do, right? We're the seasoning, right? They make the chicken. We just season it to make it taste better.
You're the sour cream on the crunch wrap.
That's exactly
That's
the
my
point. So,
favorite. Okay.
right. Good one. That's a good one.
So, well, that last question here. Given the fact that Yum does have significant franchise community, what is your advice from a communication perspective? I know a lot of our LP professionals deal with a franchise community, and they want to make sure that that's a positive interaction, that they're seen as a help, not a hindrance, when it comes to security and that kind of thing. What advice would you have for that professional?
Well, the first part is remove the excuses because everybody needs help. None of us get anywhere without leaning on somebody else, right? So in the franchise community, one of the biggest hurdles is the dual employership conversation, right? We spend hours and hours of podcasts and meetings talking about, well, how do you give them information? And the easiest answer I will tell you is you can tell a franchisee how to think, you can tell them best practices, and you can tell them good, better, best, and where to go get them. You just can't tell them what to do. And every business wants to be successful. So the first thing I would do is learn how to teach and provide information to people that either know they need it or don't know they need it yet. Right? So if you're dealing with the new franchise community, show up in a franchisee meeting and ask them what are top of mind issues for them. Because most of your LPMs have done that already. They've done it for this major corporation or for this equity store. And then now the thing is you have to write it in triple, good, better, best, industry standards, and then put it somewhere where they can access it and then tell them, hey, listen, if you need help, here's where you can go get help. RLPSA is a great organization. Let's plug into that. And here's where you can get all of this information to help you figure out what it is that you need, right? We need to guide them, not do it for them. And I think that's the evolution of the LPM. That's the evolution of the business right now, is the teaching aspect as opposed to the operational aspect. A lot of folks like to, we like bad guys. We like to catch bad guys, stop bad guys, but that is only a part of how we need to be thinking going forward.
So seen more as a resource than the
Absolutely.
hammer, right?
I mean, absolutely, because when you're a resource, we keep needing resources, right? Pretty sure water is a natural resource. Wood is a natural resource, right? That stuff you keep needing. So you want to be useful, and resource is the perfect word, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're not useful, what are you?
Yeah, for sure. So we really appreciate this quick, look into your psyche for sure. But we hope to have more in-depth conversations with you. And maybe on our next virtual think tank, we might come up with a different topic. But we really appreciate your leadership insights. Steve Antoine from Yum Brands, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.